Welcome back. We've already heard a lot about the issues and challenges that are facing the power system, but we also know there's solutions out there, and there are those folks who are working on trying to help both develop and implement those solutions. So joining us today are two organizations that are actively involved in doing exactly that, developing the solutions and then sorting out where it makes sense to implement and deploy that technology for the grid, not just for today, but for decades to come. So Roger Martella from GE Vernova is immediately to my right, to your left, and Tom Rumsey from Competitive Power Ventures, or CPV, are both here to share their experiences on projects that have been recently connected to the grid, but also how they're looking at what's coming next and what's ahead, and how are we going to try to get from here to where policymakers say they would like us to go while ensuring reliability. So first, thank you both very much for coming and for participating. Roger said, well, I'm in kind of a board meeting, but I came over to do this, and then I'm going to have to go back. And I'm like, that sounds like really important work. So we'll be very judicious with your time. And thanks so much for doing that. So Roger, I want to start with you. So I'm a non-engineer lawyer in the room, so I don't do math well. So can you talk to us a little bit about the technology that GE both has now, what you're working on, what you're aiming towards, and really, how are we going to be able to produce power reliably under a range of scenarios?
Todd, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. Trust me, I was very happy to take a break from the board meeting and come see you. I was looking forward to this and happy to be here. And I really want to thank all of you. I think this ties into some of the things I'm going to be saying. I imagine the big theme today is just for such a transformative time. And that's thanks to all of you and your leadership. I'm certainly excited about it. I imagine you are too. What an amazing time to be in this space. I was reading Larry Fink's letter coming over here, which I think reinforces a lot of these themes. 2 weeks ago, I had dinner with a number of energy reporters, and one of the reporters, New York Times, Washington Post, said, you know, in their mind, the story of this energy transformation is only 2 weeks old. I think to us, it's a bit older than that. But they're picking up on the fact they're hearing about data centers, they're hearing about energy security, and just the urgency that's driving. And so we think this is really a transformative era. It's on us. The stakes are pretty high here. After a lot of decades of talk, we're now in an era of action. And the good news is that the private sector's in the lead. And thanks to the public sector for saying that too. We appreciate Jennifer Granholm and others when she says the energy transition will be led by the private sector, enabled by the public sector. So all these catalysts, from energy security to the notion of this realignment between the public sector and the private sector, is really driving this. And when we think about what does that mean, the private sector's in the lead, it's a recognition that this is now an innovation and technology story, that it's the innovating the technology to electrify and decarbonize the grid, and the deployment of that technology is what's really going to have the impact here. So our role at GE Vernova is in the innovation side of it. We're the ones who are innovating the technologies to build that resiliency in the grid, to electrify the grid, and to decarbonize it at the same time. And happy to get into the electrification side, the decarbonization side. But Todd, you had asked about what are our technologies, what do we see as the ones leading out there? And I would kind of break them maybe into two categories. The first categories are technologies we're delivering today at commercial scale that enable both electrification and decarbonization at the same time. And then the second category would be what we call the breakthrough technologies that we're working on in our labs today. We're doing pilot projects with our partners, and we see coming into the commercialization later this decade, early next decade, at scale to not only electrify, but also importantly, lead to those level step changes when it comes to decarbonization. So in that first category today, GE Vernova helps produce 30% of the world's energy. We have the most diversified technology portfolio of any company in the world. And we start with kind of conventional power, gas and nuclear. And I think it's fair for all of us to see we're seeing a lot of reinforcement from an energy security perspective of the importance of gas and nuclear as part of the energy transition going forward. I think this is part of the comment about this is a 2-week-old story, but the need to make sure we have that affordable, reliable, sustainable base load of energy that's powering the grid. So we start with very efficient gas turbines and nuclear energy, all of which enabled by the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Act, and so on. We add on to that our interest in growing renewables as rapidly as possible. We're the leading provider of onshore wind energy in the United States technology. We make the largest offshore wind turbine. And there's also, of course, solar technology. So growing renewables as quickly as possible, again, enabled by the Inflation Reduction Act to some extent. And then we see the opportunity for the criticality of grid connections. And this is perhaps the story that I think people are really catching up on from an energy security perspective, how we need to make sure the grid is resilient from the growing threats of cybersecurity, more severe weather events, energy security like we're seeing in Ukraine, just the variability of renewables being added to the grid, the growing demand on the grid. So we are very invested in grid technology, both physical grid technology, including new technologies like HVDC, and digital technology that helps you manage all of this in real time and builds resilience. So those are the technologies we offer today, all growing demand because of the pressure for electrification, but also as we add this equipment, we track how much we're decarbonizing the grid. The second area are the breakthrough technologies for tomorrow, and here, small modular nuclear reactors. We have a product called the BWRX that'll be the first 300 megawatt small modular reactor to be commercialized later this decade. Kind of in the lead as the first to go. Happy to get into the details on that product we're very proud of. Hydrogen as a fuel. So our gas fleet will be 100% hydrogen ready by 2030. And we run our gas turbines on 8 million hours of hydrogen blends so far, more than 100 turbines. So we want to get the gas turbine fleet capable to be 100% decarbonized through hydrogen by 2030. And then carbon capture and sequestration, working on industrial hubs with our partners, recently selected for the Teesside project in the UK to make sure that we can also have the post-combustion capture, as well as direct air capture. So I think those are the innovations and technologies we're focused on right now, and happy to come back and chat about any of the details.
And boy, you left a lot for us to talk about, so thank you for that. So Tom, I want to take the kind of the flip side of that equation. CPV is, of course, a plant owner-operator, but you're also an active project developer, doing all kinds of work that you can talk about. But you have decisions to make about where to build, what fuel use to use, where you're going to get access to supply. How are you planning for what future policy changes are? As Jim mentioned, one of the things that NERC's added to the list of concerns is energy policies. I mean, that drives some of the reliability concern. And I know you're trying to address as many of those as you can on the front end. So talk a little bit about how you sort through some of those questions. How do you figure out what turbine technology you want to use? Obviously, you've partnered with GE. That's why you're here. So, does it vary project to project? And kind of walk through how you think about that as a developer, to think both for reliability today, but what you're investing all those hundreds of millions and billions of dollars for going forward.
Wow. Yeah, let me cover all that for you, Todd. First of all, thank you for the invite. I appreciate it. I really do, because I think it's, I feel like I get to be the blue collar person up here where everybody talks policy and, technology is 30 years down the road, and I'm, literally out there in a pickup, going around and trying to get these things developed. And, to your question, how do we go through that process? It's changed so much in the last 20 years. I mean, in the last decade, we've done about 5 gigawatts of projects in the United States. We're only focused in the US. We have more than double that in active development and construction today. So it's an incredible time to be in what we do, but it's also all the things you listed make it incredibly challenging to know where you can deploy private capital. We're a private company. We bring equity, we bring debt, and we try to build. So we really look at it in 3 buckets, and you've heard them all through themes today. It's policy, regulatory environment, it's technology, and it's economics. You have to have something that's investable. And so it starts with, for us, economics. Where are the market signals that are telling you, if a market is built well, it'll tell you where it needs power. Texas has done that, New York has done that, PJM is working on getting better at that. There's a number of places outside of the markets we're now building because of ESG investors. So you have to start with, how do you bring private capital? And there's nothing wrong with people wanting to make money on a project, right? If you want them to give you $1.5 billion in equity, they need a return on that. You're competing with other infrastructure investments, not just other energy investments. So once you have an economic base case, if you will, and there's 2 ways to do that. One's markets. The other, if you've not seen what Texas is doing with the Texas Energy Fund, as an energy-only market, they have a little bit of a challenge on the market side, at least being able to hedge 3, 4, 5 years down the road on a year-to-year energy market. But they've addressed the cost side. A 20-year 3% loan that's budget positive for the state. They're not part of the project. If it fails, it's still back on us where it should be. But a very innovative way to do it, and I think it's something we'd like to see throughout, because that lets us compete with other developers not just who's got the best lobbyist to get the art, get in there and get the right contracts, if you will. So that's one, the economics is where it starts. And then what's the policy? What's the regulatory environment? I was listening intently to the ISO RTO CEOs, and I tell you, I love those guys. They couldn't pay me enough to do that job. There's no way. Everybody kind of giggled when Rich said, my concern is 8 years away. If I started tomorrow, I couldn't build him a combined cycle in that time frame, right? You can't, and that's why he's worried. I think people sort of think that it's a 3 to 4 year process. It isn't. That's where you see it, because that's when construction starts. But it's a much longer process. And now, with gas turbines, you need an ESG story. So we have, over 5 gigawatts of carbon capture projects, some of the largest in the world, under development right now. But that's a whole different regulatory environment. And then back to the cost, how do you get that insured? It's new technology. It's all those issues that when you launch the H machine, it's very similar. It's new. So the regulatory environment is incredibly and increasingly challenging. I think that's why Jim Robb adds that in, because it isn't, we're in a position now where a lot of policy has gotten ahead of technological capability. And that is a real issue. It used to be, it's just, they don't want to spend the money, or they don't believe in climate change. It's not that. Rich invented the acronym, but he forgot to invent the technology, right? There is no zero emission dispatchable generation source that can last, 6 weeks, and at scale. So I can't go build that. You'll know what's available when we go build it, because we're technology agnostic. We build what the markets need, where we can finance them, and the regulatory environment supports it. And so I think you got to have those two, and then you got to have the technology, and those things also have their challenges. Solar, with the supply chain issues we're having with those. We've worked through that a lot. We've been able to build some of the largest solar projects in the Northeast on former coal mines, which is a great use of that land. But the technology piece is critical. It used to be the lead, and I would say now it's kind of being dragged forward by policy and economics. I think I loved what I heard from the ISO RTO CEOs about getting carbon pricing into the market. If you want attributes, you have to price them. The markets have worked beautifully. My concern is if they don't adjust what they incent, then we're not going to get what we want, and then people will turn away from markets, which I think would be a disaster. So how's that? Did I miss anything?
Couldn't have finished better than that conclusion, so thank you for that. So,
you got it.
Roger, you mentioned the things that you're working on, and Tom mentioned how they're thinking longer term. And the engineering challenges to the non-engineer types seem just remarkably challenging. How do you at GE think about how you're trying to address those things now? I mean, the hydrogen example is, of course, the one everyone is talking about. It's kind of the shiny thing that people want to say, this could be it. How do we make it work? How are you changing and updating the design? How are you making that technology work both now and going forward? Because the blending requirements are likely to change. The rules yet to be finalized, and we'll see where that lands. But there's all kinds of things that are changing the demands of the equipment, and you're trying to respond to those. So how do you think through that? Because that's your customer over there who's got to buy it, and they want to know that if I buy this turbine, I'm good for the next 20 years. So how do you go through that? 30, sorry, Tom.
Don't let them off the hook, 30 years.
It is the fundamental question. And you add on to that safety, which trumps everything else.
Right.
Quality and reliability. And I think that's part of the equation that we don't always talk as much about in the energy transition space, is just quality and reliability. And that's something where in the last few years, we've taken a step back and we've said, maybe we no longer have to have the biggest or the most or the largest. We need the thing that's the most reliable for our customers. Mm-hmm. And it may not be what they were thinking, but at the end of the day, what they want is something that works the most. And so we've always thought about quality, but quality is now next to safety, which trumps everything, really at the forefront. Not only for 30 years, you want it to run well for 30 years. And so I've come to appreciate, I'm not a scientist, but we have something called the Advanced Research Center. I know Tom's been there. We're very proud of it. If you've been to any of the national labs, I think it's on par with that. And I think of it as a time machine, because when we talk about those breakthrough technologies, small modular nuclear reactors, hydrogen, carbon capture, direct air capture, we have to start in the lab. We have to start on paper. And we have to start in our Advanced Research Center. And these technologies we're working on today, won't be commercialized for maybe a decade from now. Some a little sooner. I think small modular reactors, we've been working on it, will come this decade. But we're in the labs testing every little thing. And if, what I've come to appreciate, maybe obvious to you, is like we're up against the laws of physics here. So we can change something over here that makes it a little lighter, a little more efficient. But how does that impact some other part of the reliabilities? How does it impact the operation? So we're constantly solving for the laws of physics. We spend, I'd say, 2 to 3 years in the labs testing components and how these components interact together. Then we go out and we pilot things together like carbon capture projects to start to test the commercialization of it. Then we move to that commercialization phase. But to your point about this takes longer than you think. If we're going to solve for safety, reliability, quality, and solve for the laws of physics at the same time, our roadmap is that we have to do what I said earlier. We have to deliver gas, renewables, and grid technology this decade, but it's not until next decade that we really see the commercialization of these breakthrough technologies for exactly this question. Doesn't mean we're not working on it. We're working on it 24 hours a day. We have the best people in the world working on these issues, but we have to get it right. And thankfully we are working on it, because if we weren't, then you'd be starting that far behind in the chain.
Right, and go ahead, Tom.
Yeah,
first.
and it's good that it's 10 years out, because it's going to take that long to get the regulatory environment around hydrogen. You got to get pipes, you got to get pipes developed. You got to figure out how to store it. There's no regulatory environment right now that I'm aware of where you could go in and have massive hydrogen storage next to a gas plant and build the pipes. And building pipes is a challenge in most of the country, not all. But carbon capture, it's a great technology. In our view, we're going to capture, we anticipate over 90% on an H turbine, which doesn't emit a fraction of what the older generation does. But it doubles the cost. It takes a project of $1.5 billion and puts it at 3+. It doubles the size of the physical footprint, and there's no way to recover that but through government incentives right now. So it's a 30-year asset with government incentives that are 4 to 5 years from now, which is better than it's been in the past. But PTC, ITCs for wind, used to go year by year almost. You'd see a 90% drop in development in wind when they expired. You can't have that with billion-plus investments that you're going to be making in carbon capture. And we still don't have, I think there's 3 states that have Class 6 well rights. You still got to build the pipelines. You got a place to store it. Even though it's all technically there in our view, there's so much that needs to get done to make it viable. And that's why we're calling them, I don't want to say pilots, I'd like to say first movers, because I think it's ready. But I think it's going to be on us to push people a little bit to the goal line. Like, if you want to decarbonize the economy, not just the power sector, you need reliable power, which means you've got to get this stuff built now.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the issues that I was going to follow up with Roger's points. These projects don't happen overnight, and the timelines for objectives to be met, we're up against it today. So if there's a delay or there's a technological hiccup or we can't get permitting and siting resolved, it makes it that much more complicated on a much faster scale, which doesn't count all the labor, supply chain, siting, all the approval process. I mean, it doesn't take long for you to get well past that 3 years that you see above ground until I end up at 7 or 8 years. So that's something that I think we're all mindful of. So as you all work together as partners on a project, and I like the way you described that, because you've really kind of walked all the way down the aisle when you've decided you're going to do a project together. For those of us that haven't,
I bet you didn't wake up thinking that, did you, Roger?
So
I'm high maintenance.
Let me process that.
Yeah, you're going to need a minute. So for those of us,
I got to get back to my board meeting. I'm sorry.
We haven't had that experience, many of us in the room. So how do you think about matching up? How does that partnership discussion happen about the technology and is it site specific? So, a developer says we want to develop in the Marcellus or the Utica and we know the gas is X quality, but we also want to be prepared there's a hydrogen hub that's been announced. And so we think we want to be there. How does that conversation evolve over time? So those of us that haven't sat around the table and had that get a window into how this discussion and this evolution of the technological advancements are incorporated as part of that process.
You want me to start that? Yeah, I saw you point that one. Look, it's interesting you brought up walking down the aisle, because I think this relationship lasts more than most marriages in the U.S. right now, right? Because it's not just the technology and does it work at the time.
Right.
It's their services capability. I mean, you want this asset to operate for 30+ years, I don't care what technology it is. But it's got to be competitive technology. You've got to have something that, again, goes back to being financeable, it's reliable. It's our face once we build it.
Yeah.
None of these power, no offense, but none of these power projects are named GEX in the US. It's CPVX, right? And so if something breaks, we own that at that point. We're not going to blame the OEM because something broke. So there's a lot of trust and faith that has to go into it, and it's like everything else, it's relationship based, but it's also prove it. And GE has done a great job of that through the decades. They've got a great service offering. They have a financing arm. So it can't just be, we want to build a solar project, let's go buy the cheapest solar panel we can find because it makes the economics. You've got to be willing to shave some of the profitability to make sure that you're willing to put your name on it. And that takes a real commitment on both ends, right? And they've continued to innovate. We built some of their first H turbines in the US, which
H turbines for the unindoctrinated is
the new gas turbines. It's the new higher efficiency, 61% gas turbines that are moving into the hydrogen
blending
world a little bit, blending capabilities. You can do some with the others, but much easier on the H. So it's their latest showroom gas turbine. So it's all those things, and they got to stick with you through thick and thin, and they have. But it's competitive. Siemens has good technology, MHI has good technology, but when it comes down to partnership, it's been a great fit for us, and I don't think it's going to end anytime soon.
And I appreciate that, and our goal is to, at least in our professional lives, is to avoid divorce. We love our customers, and we want to stay married to them. But I think like any company, we know we learn lessons too, and things we could do better. So we appreciate the feedback and the relationships. I think something that has changed, it goes back to the theme of reliability, is at one point I think us and others, we were trying to be all things to all people. We were trying to do bespoke things for our customers. We wanted to make them happy. Our customers need this like this, and we're going to modify it. I think we're now trending the other way. Not that we don't want our customers to feel like we're designing bespoke things for them. We will make things work. But our philosophy now is workhorse products, that we want common designs that are tried and trusted, and that we can guarantee the reliability, certify the reliability, and then adapt those common designs for a number of different settings. On some of those, we're pretty far along. H-class turbines, that's the goal for our small modular reactors. Remember the old days, you design a nuclear reactor for the site. Now we're going to design one nuclear reactor, and we're going to produce it all around the world. That's a common design. On some of these breakthrough technologies like carbon capture, hydrogen, we have yet to kind of develop that common design. We're still in the labs, we're still piloting things, and that's where these types of partnerships, not only between the two of us, but frankly, we can't do it alone. You talked about pipelines, you talked about the sequestration, what are some other industrial uses, and so we're trying to create, I think in this next era of the energy transition, broader partnerships, bringing in what have historically been odd bedfellows to come in and going back to our marriage analogies, going back into how we create these relationships in a way that ultimately brings the best of all talents towards that outcome.
Yeah. You raise a number of issues, and we're short on time, so I'm going to limit myself to one question for you, Tom, and then a closing question for you, Roger. So Tom, you mentioned the RTO panel and the CEOs talking about the various challenges that exist there, and your objective is to deploy private capital. How do you respond to some of the challenges that they identified or that they highlighted that either are, this tells me there's an opportunity, or this tells me that there are challenges that make this place uninvestable, or it's not investable now, but if they made some changes, it could be. How do you think about that? Because as you noted, these are not small investments. These are multi-billion-dollar projects that you've got to feel like opportunity exists.
Yeah, one of the benefits of not working at ISO anymore is I don't have to be as politically attuned as others. I mean, it used to be you'd set goals, you had RPS goals and all those things, and that was a signal that you could go build renewables. There was a friendly environment, politically at least. Now there are laws. And these laws, I'm telling you, to hit some of the targets that are out there, if we started tomorrow with technology that doesn't exist today, we wouldn't get there, okay? And the problem is those laws are driving permitting decisions, they're driving interconnect issues, they're driving cost. And if and until those areas have a recognition that there need to be a plan A.2 or plan B, whatever they want to call it, it's almost uninvestable. And so certain areas in the country have become that way. And it's not one single state. I could list 5. I'm not going to, but I could. And then other states are far more, West Virginia, Texas, places that are saying we want the power, we need to go forward, we're willing to embrace new technologies, far more investable. My biggest concern as a developer is that our policy in too many areas is so far ahead of the technological capability to hit that policy that the private capital won't show up at the end when they need it because it's been so uncertain for such a period of time.
Right, it's that delta we talk about, the aspirational policies and operational realities. Unfortunately, that delta is growing, it's not shrinking. And so Roger, that tees me up very nicely, Tom, for the closing question I'll offer for you is you've talked about a laundry list of the technologies that GE is working on. In your view, is there a moonshot technology? Is there something out there that you go, we really think that it's not ready yet, but it's on the table, and if you can't tell us what it is, that's okay too, but are there things that you say, we have confidence that we can meet some of these moonshot objectives and we can shrink that delta and ensure reliability, and oh, by the way, it's not bad for your business either. I mean, it's good all the way around. The consumer benefits, the public benefits, you benefit, the developers. I mean, it really does feel like a lot of wins to be had.
I'd say two things. It's a really thoughtful question. Our conviction is it is an all the above strategy, that you need a diverse amount of assets. I think that's only been reinforced in the last few years. It's always been our view. It wasn't too long ago, people were trying to prejudge the outcomes, saying they wanted all of this or all of that, whether Europe or the US. We're back to a very pragmatic, all of the above type strategy, all capable of being decarbonized. Having said that, I think there's some technologies that people are underappreciating that could be those moonshots. If I had to pick one, like what's the hidden gem here, it is nuclear. Maybe it's not so much hidden anymore. I think I was at the nuclear summit last week in Brussels and everybody seems to know it. But I think small modular reactors is the technology that's going to take off in a way that perhaps 12 months ago people were not expecting or anticipating, and having the biggest impact here because it provides that baseload of affordable, reliable, sustainable electricity while decarbonizing, while meeting the data center needs, while being that very flexible approach. To your point, Tom, the permitting and all the infrastructure has to get solved for. But that, I think in 2030 we'll look back and say this was the decade of nuclear energy, and that would surprise people today.
Well, great. That is a fantastic, optimistic note to end on. So join me in thanking Tom and Roger for joining us this morning.